All right, horror movie freaks. Today we are joined by our very special guest, Jack Wallen of the iZombie book series. So welcome to the show, Jack.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And today I'm joined by Scott. He's going to be my co-host. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Scott, if you'd like to take lead, go ahead.
All right, first of all, hey freaks, thanks for listening. And thank you, Jack, for taking time out of your schedule to be with us today.
You're welcome.
The first thing I'd like to ask really is, what got you started on the path to horror writing?
Well, I guess we would kind of have to go way, way, way back to when I was a little kid. I remember I grew up in a small town in Indiana. And while I was growing up, every Friday night we had this horror host. His name was Sammy Terry. And he did a show called Nightmare Theater. And it was very campy and corny, but it made horror cool. And I fell in love with that show. And shortly after that, I just fell in love with horror. And so I was this little kid who, every time I got a chance to, when my parents would turn away, I would turn on some bit of horror on the television. And when Halloween would come around, it was just like it was my Christmas. And the world kind of opened up to me, and I could really, do what I wanted. I made costumes all the time, and it was a very magical moment every year for me. So I fell in love with horror a long, long, long time ago, but I didn't write anything until at least horror related until much later. And what set me off on this path was interesting. When I was in graduate school, I went to Purdue. I studied acting. I have an MFA in acting. I was a professional actor for 20 years or so. And I guess I still am. But while I was there, a bunch of us got together. We discovered that we were all nerds, and we had all had a long and storied past with Dungeons and Dragons. But we were kind of done with that. But we wanted to continue exploring that kind of world, and we discovered Vampire the Masquerade. So we started playing Vampire the Masquerade, and what we would do is every Friday night after rehearsal was done, we would meet at the apartment that I was living in, and we would do 12-hour sessions of Vampire the Masquerade. So we did that for about a year, and believe it or not, the same character I had from the beginning survived through the end. And I really enjoyed that character. And when we were done and I graduated from Purdue, I realized I wanted to keep that character going. And I thought, well, how can I do that? I can't really bring that character to another Vampire the Masquerade game, on top of which I didn't know anybody else that was playing the game at that point. So I thought, well, why don't I just write his story? So I was working at American Players Theater, which is a world-renowned Shakespeare festival here in the country. And while I was not on stage, I had a pad of paper with me, and I was writing out this story of my character from Vampire the Masquerade. And so I just wrote it out, and I had a lot of fun doing it, and it really started to flesh out a lot. But then I very quickly realized, well, I can't do anything with this because it's all copywritten material. This was a vampire who was a gangrel and had all these, specific powers that were specific to Vampire the Masquerade, so I couldn't do that. So I set that aside. And a couple years later, I was in between contracts of shows, and I remembered how much fun I had writing that story about that vampire. So I thought, well, I want to try this writing thing, because I had written plays and I'd written poems and other stuff. And I thought, I want to try this being a writer thing. And I knew that I wanted to write horror. But at the time, I thought to myself, I'm not ready to write horror because I loved horror so much. I don't want to start a career as a horror author until I know that I've got the chops to do it. So what I wrote was a thrill. I started a thriller series, which wound up being called the Fringe Killer series. And I wrote a couple of other things. I started writing the Shiro series and a few other things. And it wasn't until one morning I woke up and I had this question in my mind. And I thought, I wonder what it would really be like to turn into a zombie. What would it sound like? What would it look like? What would it smell and taste like? And I thought, well, the only way I can answer that question is by writing a book. So that night, I started writing the book that turned into iZombie. And that was the first horror book I wrote, and I haven't stopped since. And to make a long story short, that's it. Sorry. I can blather on quite a bit.
Oh, that's fine. Don't worry about that.
That's why we love having people like you on the interviews.
So about iZombie, that one is actually I purchased it. It's been a little while ago. Sadly, I work in retail, so I rarely have any time to do anything. So I've just gotten started into reading it recently. So I haven't got very far in it, but what I've read so far, I really like. So
Thank you.
Huge props to that. Tell us a little bit about iZombie, if you want to.
Okay, well, like I said, I came up with the idea based on that question, what would it feel like and smell like, blah, blah, blah. And when I first started writing it, I immediately knew exactly what this story had to be. In order for me to answer those questions, I had to write that story from the perspective of someone that was turning into a zombie. So in order to do that, I decided that the main character, Jacob, was going to be a journalist. And what happens is he is assigned to go to Germany for the unveiling of what's supposed to be this brand new power source that would be renewable. So he goes there, and there's this huge explosion, and then all of a sudden ash starts falling down from the sky, and there he is, and people are dead. And while he's trudging about trying to find someone else, he's attacked, he gets bitten, he gets infected, and he decides to chronicle his downward spiral into the zombie abyss. And that's what the first story is. And originally, this was just going to be one book. I was going to write this book and move on. But, you know, the way things go, you know, I at the end of this book, I thought, I really enjoyed that. And people immediately started responding to it. And I thought, okay, well, I guess I need to continue this on. And I'm not going to give anything away by the end of that story, but I had to, for the next book, some major changes had to happen. So I was very fortunate by the end of that book. I had developed some other really strong characters and decided that I could continue this story on. So I thought, I'll make it a trilogy. So I got the third book written and published it. Next thing I know, I get all these people saying, you can't end this. You can't end it now. I thought, okay, fine. So I decided I'm just going to keep it going, and I have kept it going. And I have an end game for this series, and the end game is actually going to serve as a bridge to another series called The Book of Jacob, which will be set 30 years after this series takes place. And then, you know, during the writing of this series, all of a sudden, you know, I realized, like I said before we actually started officially talking, that the zombie radio character, I decided he needed his own book series. So I have the zombie radio series, which is a spinoff. And then there was an interesting situation. Before I released Cry Zombie Cry, that book stars what was at the time a Polish metal band named Unsun. And I had written them into the book, and they were going to record their next album, and they were going to use lyrics written by me for this next album. So I'd written a bunch of lyrics for them, and it was going to be this huge, big deal. They were going to release their album at the same time I released the book. Well, in the process of that, the singer developed a physical issue, and she couldn't continue on. She went through therapy to try to solve the issue, but ultimately she couldn't do it. So I had to release the book anyway. But in the interim of me releasing Cry Zombie Cry in the book before that, there was almost a year that went by, and I realized I've got to release something in this series because people are getting really antsy. Mm-hmm. So I thought, well, I've got to come up with something. What could I do? So I thought, well, I'll write a prequel, because I had this idea for this really cool book that it was going to be a one-off that was inspired. I took a walk one day, and my mind was thinking about reality TV and how much I hated it and all that. And so I came up with this idea for this story, and I decided I set it aside. So when I decided I needed to come up with a prequel, I realized that I had this little idea for this story that I think would have worked perfectly. So I retooled it a little bit, added the iZombie mythos to it, and wrote it, and it turned out to be T-0. And it told some of the backstory of how the Mangala virus came about. And in a unique way. I think it's pretty unique in the whole genre. So I released that, thinking that, okay, I'll do this, and then a couple months later I'll release Cry Zombie Cry. Well, it turns out they still weren't ready to release the album, and then all of a sudden it crumbled, and I thought, well, I've got to release something. So I thought, okay, well, let's find another band. And I'll find another band, and I'll write a novella series, a spinoff of the iZombie series. And the first band I thought of was a band that I'd been a fan of for a long time, was Kitty in a Casket, because I thought their music is perfect. You know, they're a horror punk band, and they sing about zombies and blah, blah, blah. I thought, okay, well, I'll contact them. I sent them a message, and moments later, I got a reply. Hell yeah, we're interested in this. So we had some discussion about it, and I wrote the rough draft of the first book, which turned into the Last Casket. I sent it to them, and they gave me and it was funny because as soon as I sent it to them, they went on tour. So it was like, oh no. And so it took a while for them to read the book. And finally they read it. They gave me the big thumbs up, and I published it. And a year or so later, they contacted me and they said, hey, are you going to write a sequel to this? And I said, well, yeah, sure. And then they said, well, could you send us an outline for it? And then we'll use your outline to sort of help guide the lyrics for a new album. And I don't usually write outlines for my books. I just write by the seat of my pants.
Yeah.
And so I said, sure, of course, I'll do whatever you want. So I spent a weekend coming up with an outline for the book. I sent it to them, and that was that. And then a number of months later, I get an email back from them and said, well, we've got the album written. We didn't quite follow the outline. I said, well, can you send me the lyrics to the songs, and then I can retool the outline, and I should be able to get the book done by the time you release the album. So they sent me the lyrics. I realized I didn't need to retool the outline too much. I wrote the book, and then we released the book and the album at the same time. And that book is Kiss in Hell. It's the second book in the Last Casket series. So that's kind of a long story short of I don't even remember the question.
yeah, that was good because that was one of the other ones I was looking at, because I'm looking at your book list right here, and you have so many books on here.
Yeah, I just published my 30th book.
Wow, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Okay,
I don't write all horror. What's that?
I think you're starting to rival King's collection of books.
You know,
Wow.
I don't write all horror. Every once in a while, I have to take a break from it. I just published my first cyberpunk book, but now when I got that done, it's interesting the way my editorial calendar is set up. I do it in such a way that when I'm just about ready to finish writing a book, I kind of send these feelers out into the universe, so the universe can tell me what I need to write next. And the universe was kind of telling me that I needed to return to my Nameless saga, which is really a pure horror. It's brutal. It's kind of like a cross between Clive Barker and Edward Lee. And
I'm sold.
it's actually the first book of it has been compared to Barker's earlier works, which has been my proudest moment so far. But so the universe was telling me that, but then all of a sudden, fans of the iZombie series started crawling out of the woodwork saying, we need a new book. So I thought, okay, fine, I'll write the next book in the iZombie series. So I decided to sort of meet myself halfway. And I've decided that the next book in the iZombie series is going to be a little darker than the last few. So but then as soon as I get done with this, and then I'm going to write the next book in the Nameless saga, which is going to be called The Dark Side Down, which is I have some really cool ideas for it. I'm sorry, I keep going off on these tangents. So
Oh, you're good.
I have to apologize. One of the things that as a writer, I refuse to follow the rules. I'm a huge rule breaker. And one of the big rules that I break is genre. I like to cross genres. I like to pull in shit from everywhere. And so I was on one of my regular podcasts, I was talking to my co-host about, she teaches writing to children. And she was talking about how they all of her kids all of a sudden got interested in the whole steampunk and cyberpunk and all these different punk, these things. And we started talking about that. I thought, well, it would be really cool if I wrote like a punk genre. So out of that, I wrote a new book that will be released at the end of the summer, and I'm calling it Crime Punk. And then I realized I want to try to punk as many genres as I can. So I'm going to try to write a horror punk novel. But then I thought, well, how am I going to do that? Well, at the same time, trying to get all the stuff I normally write done. Then I thought, well, that's going to be the theme for the rest of my year. And so, and I knew that earlier on, a year or so ago, I knew that one of the things I wanted to do was take my Nameless saga and possibly write it in Victorian England period. And the reason I want to do that, and I don't know if that'll be the next book in that series, it might be the fourth book in the series, but the reason why I want to do that is if you've ever watched Hellraiser 4, Bloodlines, and I know that the studio totally fucked that movie up, just like they fucked up Nightbreed. But
yes.
And I'm hoping like hell that sometime we're going to get a director's cut of Hellraiser 4, because I think the original intent of that movie was amazing. But the storyline that takes place in the past, in the Victorian England past, was brilliant. And it was visceral, and it was glorious and elegant. And anytime you can mix that kind of period pieces and horror, there's something ultimately dark that we can't match now because of that period. And I thought, I want to write that.
Sounds good.
Because and the way I have the Nameless saga set up, it will work perfectly, because it jumps back and forth between hell and the firmament and times and all that. So I'm hoping to do that. I don't know if that's definite, but I don't know. Anyway, I'm planning on kind of doing the same thing with the next book in the iZombie series. I'm going to try to give it not a punkish in the literal sense of the term, literary sense of term, sort of a punkish feel to it.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to that. Like I said, I just got started with iZombie, so I'm looking forward to reading through that whole series and then looking at the other books here. The another one that caught my eye was, where was it here? Is it pronounced Shiro?
Shiro, yeah, that's I wrote that. That's Shiro is a series about a transgendered superhero.
That's what Scott was telling me. I thought that sounds very unique. The very first full length novel I wrote was A Blade Away, and A Blade Away is the first book in the Fringe Killer series, and what that deals with is a very twisted man who is killing off transgendered members of the transgendered community here in Louisville, Kentucky. At the time I wrote it, I was very close to a couple of transgendered people, and they were wonderful. I loved them. They were very good friends of mine. And so I wrote that book kind of in honor of them. And after I finished writing that book, I realized that what I had written was a very dark homage to that community. And I needed to write something celebratory and light. So I thought, well, what better way to do that than to create a superhero, a transgendered superhero, because there's multiple levels in that. There's the transgendered superhero fighting the normal supervillains, and then there's the transgendered superhero fighting society. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a multi-layered piece. But what I love, truly, outside of celebrating that community, what I love about that is through the series, there's 3 books. There is Shiro, then there's Shiro 2, Zombie A Go-Go, and then there's Shiro 3, Death by Cosplay. As the series progressed, the narrator of the series developed a character on his own. You know how Deadpool breaks the fourth wall a lot? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I started doing that a long time ago with Shiro, and the narrator not only comments on the story, but comments on the reader's thoughts, commenting on the story. So the narrator makes fun of the reader. The narrator makes fun of himself. The narrator makes fun of me.
Yeah.
So
I like it.
I just have so much fun writing that series. I don't write it very often. What happens is I'll just write this darkness for so long, and then all of a sudden I'll be like, I have to have a break. I need to write something fun. So I'll go write a Shiro book. And my wife hates it when I write Shiro books because I write all my fiction at night. So my wife's in bed and I'm sitting in bed with my laptop, and I like writing my fiction at night because I feel like the darkness and all of that is very conducive to writing horror, because you never know what's in the shadows, and it may be helping me write. It may be feeding me these little hints and insights into the darkness. Oh, yeah. So I write all of my stuff at night. My wife's sitting beside me, and when I'm writing Shiro, I laugh so hard because of not only the silliness of it, but I'm so proud of that series, and I wake her up all the time. So before I start writing a book, and then I have to be like, honey, okay, for the next month I'm going to be writing Shiro, so be prepared.
Oh yeah, I was the same way.
Damn it, Jax! In the middle of the night.
I used to write a lot of like movie scripts just because I enjoyed writing, and I used to do that with my wife all the time. It'd be the middle of the night, and I'd wake her up. What do you think of this? Should I leave this in or should I take this out? So I definitely know all about that.
Oh.
That's. But yeah, I can't because
you have one particular project.
What's that?
You have one particular project that is very near and dear to me.
Yes.
And of course, I'm talking about Scream Park.
Yeah.
For those who are listening who don't know, I used to work in a haunt called Scream Park, and it was probably the highlight of my life at that point. It's also where I got the opportunity to first meet Mr. Jack Wallen here. You care to kind of give a rundown of how Scream Park came to be?
Okay. So I had a friend, a mutual friend, that was working with Scream Park, and she came to me, and she knew that I was an actor, and she knew that I had taught acting. And she came to me and asked me if I'd be willing to teach an acting boot camp for the actors at Scream Park. I said sure. So for a weekend, I went to Scream Park, to the facility, and taught this boot camp. And while I'm during the boot camp, I decided we were going to write a little one-act play because I felt it was a necessary step for some of the actors to learn how specificity and all of these other techniques were necessary in order to develop a realistic character in a haunt. And I'm watching this thing, and while I'm watching this thing, I'm thinking, there's a story here that I need to write about this haunt. So I talked to the owner and I said, would you allow me to write a fictional novel based on Scream Park using the real characters in Scream Park and the name Scream Park and all that? And he agreed. So I set out to write this book, and it turned out to be something. It's a very special book for me. Because the iZombie series is really a post-apocalyptic fiction series for me. Scream Park was truly the first horror novel I wrote, and on top of which it was a horror novel that I wrote knowing these people that I was writing about. So it was really special to me, and I had actually planned on making this a series, and then Scream Park unfortunately closed and all that. Now, what's interesting, though, in the interim, before Scream Park officially closed, I was contacted again by the people that own Scream Park saying, hey, we're going to add this other feature to the park, and we want to produce a one-act play so that the people waiting in line could watch. Would you write the script? So I said, yeah. And they wanted me to write a script based on the haunts. So I wrote this one-act play and handed it over to them, and then Scream Park closed, and the one-act play was never produced. So what I did was I added that one-act play into the Scream Park book, so when you purchase the Scream Park book, you're also getting the one-act play that I wrote for that, which has never been published anywhere else.
Cool. I'm going to have to check it out because Scott's told me all about the Scream Park book, but
Yeah.
I haven't had a chance to read it. Like I said, I was starting with the iZombie series, so...
I do have an idea for another Scream Park book, and if Scream Park is ever opened again, I might go ahead and write it. So, yeah.
Yeah, because when I find an author that I like, and like I said, I've really enjoyed iZombie so far, I tend to read everything that they have.
Well, it's interesting about, I've always found, because I write in a bunch of different genres, I have found that horror fans are more loyal than any other fan. When they find an author or a filmmaker or a band that they love, they cling to them like their life depended on it.
Oh yeah, like one of my favorite bands is Rammstein, and several of their members have actually broke off and did some solo stuff, and I've followed every one of the members and everything they've done.
Yeah.
So, and same way, one of my all-time favorite authors, I don't know if you've had a chance to read any of his books, Brian Keene.
Oh yeah.
I love his series. I just bought one of his more recent ones, The Complex, so I'm in the middle of reading it right now. But I've read, I think, everything that man has done.
I think if you ask a lot of modern zombie readers who helped inspire them, the vast majority of them will say Keene.
Yeah, he's really good because the first book I read of his was the Rising, of course, and all that. And since then, I've just read everything he had. It doesn't matter if it was about zombies. It doesn't matter if it was giant earthworms. It doesn't matter what it was.
Right.
Did Keene do one of the Resident Evil books?
Keene did not.
No.
For some reason, I thought I saw his name attached to one at one point.
No, I think he made a post on Twitter about it, but he didn't.
That might have been it.
Have anything to do with it. All of his has been, as far as I know, have been more original. He did a few comic books and things like that too.
And Jack, I love Scream Park. I love it to death. But I have one issue with the book, and it stems from the fact that I know these people, and it really boils down to Chris Davis. I cannot see this man anymore without thinking, I've imagined you fucking.
I know.
It's the only issue I've had with that entire book is just that aspect.
Just puts that mental image.
Seeing a green-haired clown flying and landing in my gut was a whole other issue, but that was hilarious.
Well, that definitely
one of the things
I can't wait to read.
That was also one of the first books I ever wrote that contained real people. I've done that a number of times now, but it was such a treat to and I was nervous about it to write this book and then hand it over and get the reactions and hear people say, "Oh my God, you nailed this. This is exactly who we are and what we're like," and blah blah blah. It was a lot of fun.
Every one of us that you put in that book, you nailed to a T. It was insane. And it got enough popularity with the people who regularly came to Scream Park that they had us signing copies of the book.
I know. That's great.
You know how hard it is to write in a fake pig hand? I mean, come on.
It's more authentic that way, though.
This is very true. They had me sign it by my name and as Barnabas, and it was weird.
The
Josh,
pig mask is famous.
Do you have the next question?
I was actually going through the books. I had another book I was wanting to ask about that caught my interest. Give me 1 second. I'm going through the list now, trying to find it. Gothika.
That's the second book in the Fringe Killer series. Now, another interesting little story. Back in the day, I used to be a big old goth. And which should not surprise anyone, especially considering I now have cobalt blue hair and lime green glasses.
And you got me re-addicted to Depeche Mode.
So before I wrote that book, there was a club here in Louisville called Main Street Lounge, and every Friday night they had Goth Night, and I started going to Goth Night, and I went to Goth Night every Friday night for a very long time. And got to know a lot of people there, and really, they became really important in my life. And when I was coming up with the idea for the idea behind the Fringe Killer series is that it takes a group of people that live on the fringe of society, and they either become the victims or the killers. So I realized that there were these people that were going to Goth Night on Main Street Lounge were all wonderful people, and I wanted to represent them and show them in in a human light, like most people neglect to see them in. So I wrote Gothika, and effectively what Gothika is it's all of this energy that's in this building, that is now a club. A goth club was at one point in the turn of the century a prison for the criminally insane, and all of this negative energy brings this criminal back from the dead. So this book has a lot of paranormal elements and horror elements in it, and it's one of those books that when people read it, they're like, why aren't I reading this series? And it's it's because it's the first book, A Blade Away, is pretty brutal, and then Gothic is pretty frightening. The second two books, I tried to take it away from that. And I keep thinking that I want to revisit that series and then take it back to the paranormal kind of thing. And the main character is a woman. She's a female detective, and then her partner is a gay detective, and it's set in Louisville. And I keep thinking that I want to go back to that and turn those two people into kind of paranormal detectives. I don't know if I'm going to do that or not. It's really hard. I've got so many series that I write, and I've been trying to weed them out a little bit, but I sometimes miss writing those series because I love those characters so much. So I might go back to writing that series. I don't know.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm all of the series you've got going. I couldn't even imagine trying to keep that many series going. I think it would fry my little brain. I really do.
Well, I think it's hard sometimes because. I know there are a lot of people out there that love the Shiro series, and I would love to write it more, but I have got to keep the iZombie series going because that's my bread and butter, and then at the same time I also have to kind of feed the darkness in my soul every once in a while. So I have to go back to the Nameless saga, and I have a steampunk series that I write, and I love that, and I know after finishing Lament, which is my cyberpunk book, I know I'm going to go back to that because I had so much fun writing that. So, yeah, my to be written list. I have a document on that contains all of the books that I plan on writing and all my notes. I mean, it's huge.
I can imagine.
And I often tell people, and I know I get criticized for this, but I firmly believe that there is no such thing as writer's block. I think that there are times when writers face these walls where they can't continue forward, but I think it's usually because they're either not writing in their own voice, or they're writing something they shouldn't be writing at the time, or whatever. But a true artist is never at a lack of inspiration. Never.
Yeah, that's I guess you compare it. That's kind of the way I'm writing right now. We're doing a contest on the Horror Movie Freaks, where people are submitting short stories, and then once the short stories get done, we've got a couple bands that are actually going to just write a lyric based on a little short story, and then we're going to release it as a free album. Sure. So I'm working on like 3 short stories right now, and every time I get to a point where I'm not sure where I want to go with it, I start in on one of my other short stories and go with it another chapter, and then I'll come back to this one. And between the podcast, the keeping up with the website, keeping up with work and family and daughter and everything else, it seems like I have no time for anything.
It is. It's hard. I have all these book series I write. I'm also a tech journalist. I'm also a book narrator. I have podcasts. I have a family. It gets crazy after a while. And one of the hardest, this is what we call first world problems. My brain never stops thinking about what I'm writing or what I'm going to write or what I have written. It's just a nonstop treadmill. And so it's exhausting sometimes to try to keep up with it. But, when you're an artist, it's how you survive. It's how you cannot not do it.
That's me. I had gotten out of, me and Scott had actually been a part of a website for, we've known each other for, 15 years,
14
Scott?
or 15 years now, yeah.
Yeah, we'd been a part of another horror website that sadly, due to family and jobs and everything else, that website ended up going under after about 10 years.
But, as well as social media breaking out.
Yeah. And it's just this latest horror site, everything's taken off, and it's got me rejuvenated.
Sure.
At work, it's all I think about's what I can do next. So I definitely understand the being busy part of it. So your podcast, the zombie podcast, I know we talked about it a little bit. We talked more about the iZombie, the book series.
Mm-hmm.
How have you enjoyed doing the zombie radio?
Well, it's one of those things that it started out as a means to an end to promote the book series, and then it very quickly became something that I love doing because I have so much fun doing that character and just doing. I have absolute and total control over it. So I don't usually think of an idea. I just hit record and start. Every once in a while, I'll get inspired for something, but most often it's just, let's see where we go with this. But I'm always referencing the book series, even if it's just the slightest reference. But mostly, I just have so much fun with it, and people love they love the series, and I've been doing it since 2011. Every Saturday morning I record it, so you can imagine I've got a lot of time invested in that, and it's been a great vehicle for me, and it really kind of prompted me to also, because I was a book narrator a long time ago, and I kind of set that aside, and the zombie radio sort of prompted me, it reminded me how much I enjoyed doing that. So being in front of a mic is second nature to me now.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've never tried doing anything like a podcast as a character before, but me and Scott had discussed a little bit of possibly doing like a little short drama radio series.
Yeah.
So we're thinking about giving that a
the old
shot.
radio dramas back to being.
Because
that's I often sometimes I describe zombie radio as more like a micro drama instead of a podcast, because it has nothing to do with what anybody thinks of as a podcast today. And I think podcasts are great. I have 2 other ones that I do, and they're standard podcasts. But zombie radio tends to be between 10 and 15 minutes long, and that's it. And it's really a radio station. It's a fictional radio station and a fictional DJ. And his goal is to help people survive the apocalypse, be it through information, bringing people together, or music or humor. And sometimes I'll try to tie it into an event, a news event that's happening at the time. So it allows me an avenue that nothing else does. And I can't.
Because I've listened to a couple of them. I didn't listen to too many because I didn't know if there was going to be any spoilers for the book, so I'm trying not to listen to that many of them.
There are not. I tried very hard to not do spoilers. Every once in a while, he'll see the way the whole iZombie series was set up originally is that the first book in the series sort of becomes the Bible for the New World Order. So that book gets referenced a lot in the rest of the series.
Yeah.
So because the by design, the book was written by a journalist who wanted everybody to know what happened to him. So it's frequently referenced, and in fact, the new series, the Book of Jacob, will very much be about that. So it's all sort of self-referential anyway, but there's still, so every once in a while, the DJ will read something from either the Jacob Plummer's journal, which is iZombie, or he'll read something from Bethany Nishimi's blog, which was My Zombie My, and on and on and on. So it's also a way for me to give people little snippets into what the books are like.
Uh-huh. That's like I said, I the rest of the reason I hadn't listened to more of them is because I was just afraid of spoilers. So now I'm good. I can go listen to some more. But yeah, I can't wait to finish up these series because it reminded me when I first heard the zombie radio. It reminded me loosely of a movie I watched a while back.
Pontypool.
Pontypool, that's it.
Yeah. I remember I started recording, a couple of years after I started recording the zombie radio podcast. I watched Pontypool and I was like, wow, that's hauntingly familiar.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that movie.
It's a great film. It's a great film.
I had never heard of it before. I just picked it up. I was browsing through. I want to say it might have been Netflix or something. Just browsing through. I thought, hey, what's this? I'll give it a try. And I liked it. It was actually a really good movie. But let's see here. And another podcast, I don't know if you've heard it, since we were talking about the radio dramas. Have you heard the series called We're Alive? Yes, I have. I'm a big fan of that.
I've never listened to it, but I've heard of it.
Yeah, it went on for 4 years, and that's basically what it was a drama series. They had a full cast, they had full sound effects. I mean, if you close your eyes when you listen to it, you can almost feel like you're riding along in the car with the characters when they're going from point A to point B. So I've gotten really into like podcasts and like the drama radio shows and everything. And I don't know.
I did a drama radio 20 some years ago, and they're fun to do. They're just really hard to mastermind because, you've got to have a large room. I mean, you could do it over Skype, but to really pull it off, I think you need to have actors in the same room so they can react off of one another.
Right, and that's the way We're Alive did. Because, like I said, I've talked to Casey Wayland, he's the producer, the director. He basically came up with everything to do with We're Alive, and that's the way they did. I mean, one of the scenes they actually end up in the water somewhere, and they had somebody set up a pool, fill the pool full of water, and throw ice cubes in it, so the actors seemed more realistic that they were in freezing water. So, he went all out, but they've got a studio and everything. They're actually growing up really big right now. I think his next series is starring Lawrence Fishburne and somebody else that he's producing.
Nice.
So it's doing really well for them, and that's what more got me into doing the podcast. And then me and Scott talking about drama podcast. And I've had a ball. I never even considered doing podcasts before, but it's been so much fun talking to everybody.
Sure.
So
now, for people who are interested in finding the Zombie Radio podcast, where do they need to go for that?
That is zombieradio.org.
And if they're interested in finding more information on you and your books,
you could go to jackwallen.com.
Also, you can find this gentleman on Twitter at JL Wallen. Has a hell of a presence there, to say the least. And I hope that those of you who are listening who haven't already gone and joined his Twitter, go and do it now.
You can also you can find me on Facebook as well at facebook.com/author.jackwallen.
Awesome.
Right on.
Yeah, and of course your books, I've seen them on Amazon, and I see you've got the store on your site, so there's plenty of options there to get the books. Yeah. We're going to link everything, of course, in the video description.
Thank you.
And we're hitting on 50 minutes, so that's about the end of our podcast. So I hate to rush, but we try to keep around the hour mark.
Oh, I understand.
But we really appreciate you coming on. It's been so much fun talking with you about everything. And next time you have a book release, be sure and keep us in mind. We'll do another one.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. You have a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you.